his brain. These findings were present in 2009.
I see, and I believe you've prepared some images that you've taken from the prior to the accident images and post-accident images and noted those, and is that correct?
That's correct.
And we'll show those to the jury in just a second, but what I want to do while we have this one up is give you a pointer and have you point to other findings that you see in this MRI from 2017. Is that okay? Will that help you explain to the jury your opinions about this image?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, I'll bring it to you. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Okay, Dr. Black, so you've talked about the green arrows. What other findings do you see here?
So one finding that was consistent over...
Can't hear it.
Yeah, should we get him a microphone? Sorry.
Dr. Black, the handle's right there.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Does that work? This study does show imaging that was, or findings that were demonstrated over a decade of imaging, in this case, dating back to 2009. One of them was a mild degree of cortical volume loss or loss of brain volume. The other was in this area here, these are the ventricles, and it showed as disproportionate enlargement of the ventricles relative to the amount of tissue loss in the gray matter and overall brain volume. The findings around the ventricles, these white areas, are very typical of what's called microvascular disease, where brain matter around the ventricles is deprived of oxygen over a long period of time, and that results in gliosis or scarring. This pattern is very typical of what we call microvascular ischemic white matter disease, and that was present in 2009.
And did I hear you correctly earlier? Do you have specialized training in those particular findings beyond what a typical radiologist might have?
My fellowship training and experience in neurology and consistently reading brain MRI gives me expertise in looking at these findings, which we often see on a regular basis.
I see. So this is a post-ski collision image, correct?
This particular sequence is from 2019. My understanding is the accident occurred in 2016.
Yeah, and I think you said 19, but you pointed to 2017.
I'm sorry, 2017. Yes,
right.
Correct.
Yes, and so you said earlier, I believe, that the same findings you're pointing to, again, not just Dr. Gibby's findings with the green arrows, but the other ones you just talked about, they're in the pre-accident images. Is that right?
Yes, my review of the imaging that was done at the Veterans Administration Hospital in 2009 shows these similar findings, and in the reports that were provided by the neuroradiologists who read the imaging at that time, they described these findings.
Right. Okay. So let's maybe have you sit down again, and I'll pull up those slides that you made. Thank you. Thanks. So this is Defendant's Exhibit 101A through, I believe it's A through F. And, Your Honor, I move to admit this as a demonstrative exhibit.
No objection. Defense Exhibit 101A through F is received for demonstrative purposes.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Dr. Black, do you recognize this slide?
Yes, this slide is also what's called a flare sequence, a T2 flare sequence, done in what's called an axial plane, which just means the orientation, the way the image was acquired through the brain. This image was acquired in March of 2009 at the Veterans Administration Hospital.
So that's before the accident, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and again, when I say accident, I mean the ski collision in 2016.
Yes.
And it's not terribly easy to see, but I can call it out here. There's a little arrow. Do you recognize that?
I put that arrow there, yes.
Okay, and what does it point to?
That arrow points to white matter disease, similar to what Dr. Gibby had pointed out in the imaging from 2017.
Right, okay, so in other words, that prior, or this is a prior finding that's the same as the post-accident finding Dr. Gibby saw.
Yes, about 8 years earlier.
Okay, got it. And what is this finding associated with?
Again, most commonly we see this with what we term microvascular ischemic white matter disease. There are predisposing risk factors for this, where in some patients it may be accelerated, but it's typically a process that's due to pathology or abnormalities in the very small, some of the smallest blood vessels that supply the brain, particularly around the ventricles.
Then I'll go to the next one, which is 101B, and again, call out a section here at the bottom. There's kind of a faint red arrow. Again, did you put that there?
I did.
And why'd you put that there?
Because it, again, shows the same pattern of white matter disease that was demonstrated on MRI of 2017.
Okay, so again, a finding before the accident that was there also after the accident.
That's correct.
And what's this finding associated with?
The exact same description.
Got it. Okay, then if we move to 101C, there's yet another red arrow. I take it you put that there.
Yes.
And is it again to point out that Dr. Gibby's finding of post-accident problems in that area preceded the accident?
Yes, accounting for technical differences away in the plane of the way this exam was acquired from 2009 to 2017, these findings are identical.
Right, got it. Okay, and they're also associated with the same things you've described already?
Most likely microvascular disease, and that's when he underwent his comprehensive imaging workup at the VA hospital in 2009. It was also attributed to vascular disease at that time.
Okay, so Defense Exhibit 101D is like your same version of that 2017 image that Dr. Gibby looked at.
Correct.
And it has those same spots. I'll just use the laser here. Again, these arrows are kind of faint on my copy. I apologize, but they're pointing to those same points we've just looked at previously. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then if we go to the next image, this is a new image we haven't looked at, correct?
Correct.
And this one's from 2021, as it's marked. Where was this image taken? Do you recall?
Yes, this image was obtained at Blue Rock Medical or Riverwoods Imaging, which Dr. Gibby owns, and this is the same sequence that we've shown before as far as how it is technically obtained by MRI. Same slice.
Got it. And again, we have some arrows, correct?
Correct.
And those are your arrows?
Yes.
And they're showing, I take it, the same disease process or same findings that you've seen in the 2009 and then 2017 images.
That's correct.
So you're seeing this same condition in the brain for many years, both before the accident and after it.
Over an 11-year period, a similar pattern of white matter disease, yes.
Next image, 101F, we call out that upper left quadrant arrow, and again, I believe you put that there, correct?
Yes.
And kind of for the same reasons, to show these conditions persist from 2009 before the accident to this image in 2021.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, so
I'm giving the jury 101G, that was referenced, was it not?
that would be the next one,
Okay.
which I haven't referenced, but if there's no objection, that's just the next bit of the slides.
No objection.
Okay.
What is that?
Could we see it though?
Can you move that?
But just let us see it before you.
Sure.
Yeah, it's in your hard to find here. Okay, thank you.
Is that 101F?
So this is 101F on the screen, and then what Steve has put here is 101G.
Correct.
Right.
Defense Exhibit 101G, is that also for demonstrative purposes?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Received for demonstrative purposes?
Okay, so Dr. Black, you've used various medical terminology that we might not all be familiar with, microvascular disease, for example. Can you give us a sense of what, in layperson's terms, what these sorts of findings are correlated with, how they impact a person?
Sure. The microvascular disease itself is a term that's used to describe micro, just meaning very small, and then vascular, the blood vessels, that when these blood vessels over time become diseased, which happens in a broad section of the population, in some people it's accelerated due to underlying high blood pressure or perhaps other diseases of the blood vessels, then you start to see scarring initially around the ventricles. These are unlike large strokes that may affect the cortex of the brain. These are smaller areas where the blood vessels are compromised, and it results in scarring of the tissue around the ventricles, and that's why we call it white matter disease. The other imaging in 2009 from the Veterans Administration, the CT angio, specifically looked at the larger blood vessels that supplied Mr. Sanderson's brain, and in those images they found plaque or hardening of the arteries in the carotid bifurcation on his right side, and then also in the larger blood vessels inside of his brain near where his retinal arteries come off, or the cavernous carotid arteries, and those also show plaque or atherosclerosis.
Okay, is it too reductive to say that these findings are an indication of an aging brain?
Well, aging can result in this because we're all deteriorating to some degree or other every day we live.
Right.
But because we have a baseline, you can attribute certain findings. If it's happening at an accelerated level, given someone's age, then it might indicate there's underlying medical problems. The other finding that was present that was consistently present was the enlargement of the ventricles, which on all images seem to be disproportionate or out of the proportion to the amount of atrophy of the brain. In several reports, there was a suggestion of a diagnosis of normal pressure hydrocephalus, and in fact, if you go to the image, let's see, that maybe the 2021. We don't have it on here. There's an image you showed that shows what's called transependymal edema, and that's fluid that leaks through the side of the ventricle due to pressure buildup in the ventricle, and that's a supporting finding from an imaging perspective of normal pressure hydrocephalus. Obviously, that has to be correlated to someone's clinical presentation and symptoms, and that's where a neurologist would play an important role in that.
I see. And I think the jury has heard about this term multiple times, but let's spend just a moment from your perspective defining what normal pressure hydrocephalus is.
Normal pressure hydrocephalus is basically an imbalance of the way fluid's managed within the ventricular system of the brain, and it can result in confusion or unsteadiness of gait when it's clinically applicable. But from an imaging perspective, that diagnosis is suggested when the ventricles seem to be disproportionately enlarged relative to the brain volume itself.
So from an imaging perspective, there was strong indication that Mr. Sanderson had normal pressure hydrocephalus.
It was suggested in every brain study he's had since 2009.
And is it a progressive condition? In other words, does it get worse with time?
Yes, it can.
And then I'm going to go to another image another report, a document that the jury has already seen. This one we looked at with Dr. Gibby. This is his report from March 3rd, 2021. Do you remember seeing this?
Yes, I reviewed this.
Okay. I believe it's also part of Gibby's packet in Plaintiff's Exhibit 31. What I want to point out, I think I called this out with Dr. Gibby, I want you to comment on it. There's a part of this report that says, I don't see any sign of shearing injury. Do you see that?
I see his report, yes.
And do you agree with that?
I agree with this report, yes.
Okay. And what do you understand Dr. Gibby's opinions to be as shearing injury is concerned?
So this report was performed on March 3rd, 2021, specifically looking for evidence of brain trauma. So that was the clinical history provided to Dr. Gibby, and he was looking in detail for any imaging findings that would support closed head injury.
And would shearing injury be one of those?
Yeah, the things that Dr. Gibby would have been looking for, or that any of us would look for when we're evaluating a study in a patient with brain injury, would be shearing of the white matter tracts. These are very delicate tracts where if there's a rapid deceleration of the brain, those can shear. When they do shear, they deposit little microhemorrhages that leave blood products in the brain, specifically iron that's found in hemoglobin. So in another sequence, Dr. Gibby would have been looking for any evidence of iron deposition, which he mentions here, pathologic iron deposition. And then the other thing you would look for is bruising of the cortex of the brain. The brain does move to some degree with inside the skull because of it's bathed in cerebrospinal fluid. So if there's a rapid deceleration, the brain cortex can hit up against the skull and cause a bruise. In some cases, it can result in hemorrhage, but in other cases, it can result in focal atrophy at those locations. So in this case, none of the imaging showed a contusion, no shear injury, and no evidence of pathologic hemorrhage in the brain.
What would you expect to see in a person's imaging after some kind of traumatic brain injury?
Well, it depends on the severity, of course.
Right.
In mild trauma, nothing.
Okay. And how would you describe Dr. Gibby's opinions about the evidence of trauma in his Mr. Sanderson's post-collision imaging?
In Dr. Gibby's report, where he specifically was looking for evidence of trauma, he emphatically states there is no evidence of post-traumatic brain injury in his report. Now, it is interesting because it contradicts to some degree his description in his position.
And how does it contradict that?
Well, Dr. Gibby mentions that in his deposition that the white matter disease that we've reviewed is very typical of shear injury or pathologic brain injury. But yet in his own report of the imaging which was performed at his center, which is identical to the findings in 2017 where he was offering that opinion in his deposition, he emphatically states that there is no evidence of post-traumatic brain injury.
Objection. The state's prior testimony. Overruled. The jury will have to recall the testimony.
Dr. Black, do you see on this report any indication that this image was compared to prior images?
No,
Is that common to do when you do a report, you compare it to prior images?
there were 3 imaging studies done after the accident. One was a CT scan done again at the Veterans Administration in 2016, which was compared to 2009. The imaging that was performed in 2017 and 2021 make no reference of comparison dating back to 2009. So I presume those images were not available to them.
Is that a problem? Does that lead to any limitations of a study if you don't look back at the prior studies?
It does limit the way that a neuroradiologist can interpret an image. If you have prior imaging, it helps put things into context and can narrow the differential or the possibilities in terms of the diagnosis. For example, in this case, knowing that the white matter disease pre-existed in 2009 is helpful to exclude that it's a result of shear injury from an accident in 2016. So yes, comparison imaging, when it's available, is of extreme importance.
So are you critical of Dr. Gibby for not doing that comparison?
Not necessarily critical. Those images just may not have been available to him. I think if you offer an opinion as to causality and you do have imaging that's available from the Veterans Administration, and someone draws a conclusion without baseline imaging taken into account, that can alter someone's conclusion and lead to an error in how they're discussing why that abnormality exists.
And do you believe that sort of error occurred here with Dr. Gibby's opinion?
I do. I think he was limited by the unavailability or lack of comparison to the imaging that was done in 2009. Yes.
Okay, I want to move to another report. This is for that 2017 image we started with, the one with the green arrows that was taken at Dr. Fong's clinic. It's in Plaintiff's Exhibit 33, page 8. I don't know that we've shown it, so I'd move to admit it.
Plaintiff's exhibit which?
It's Plaintiff's Exhibit 33, page 8, and I guess 8 and 9. There's 2 pages. Just the report.
Just the imaging or the report? Which one?
Which one of plaintiffs or?
Exhibit 33, Fong's packet, pages 8 and 9.
All of us are.
Oh, we
we're
did
already admitted.
Okay, great. I just know we didn't admit some of it. Yep.
Is 33 received?
That was excluded.
33 was not received.
Seems like no objection. May I publish it to the jury, Your Honor?
No objection.
Plaintiff's exhibit 33, page 8 is received.
And James, do you want it from start to end, or was there just one?
No, just
portion?
2 pages, page 8 and page 9.
Page 8 and page 9 are received.
Yeah, this is, again, the report connected to the image that we looked at first, taken at Dr. Fong's clinic in 2017. Is that correct, Dr. Black?
That's correct.
And I want to point to, I guess we should first ask the question we were just asking about Dr. Gibby. Do you see any comparison here?
No.
Okay, so the same points you made about the limitations of Dr. Gibby's report, you would say about this report, is that right?
Correct.
And if we call out this bottom part that's called impressions, I'd like for you to comment on whether you agree with these.
I do agree with these impressions.
And will you take us through them in layperson's terminology? Maybe we could start. We covered some parts of the ventricles. You feel like you've explained that?
Well, I think we can. Let me just emphasize one other aspect of
Go ahead.
the ventricles. Also, I think it's important to note that the context of this study being acquired was specifically with the intent to look for any evidence of closed head injury or significant brain trauma. And so there are pertinent negatives that are pointed out by the radiologist who interpreted this exam that did not exist, like hemorrhage in the brain or evidence of a contusion. So there are pertinent negatives, even with the strong bias of looking for those because of the history.
So just to make sure I'm understanding you, that when you talk about bias, you're just saying going into this image, they heard a history of traumatic brain injury, concussion, so they're apprised of the possibility of various findings that might be associated with that, and they want to find them. They're looking
Correct.
for them.
That's correct.
Foundation sustained for leading.
So maybe just comment on bias again, because that term is used in various ways. What do you mean when you talk about bias in these?
When I'm referring to bias, I'm talking professionally. When we interpret an exam, the clinical context of that exam or why that exam is being obtained is important to us. If somebody has an infection or if somebody has a brain tumor, then we understand that and we're looking for various findings that would support that. In this case, if somebody has known trauma, then that would alert the radiologist to look for certain findings. So in the case of the MRI performed in 2017 and the one performed in 2021, there would be an alert to look for findings related to trauma. So the negatives, the pertinent negatives in the exam from 2017, just like the one that was performed in 2021, would rule out imaging evidence of significant head trauma.
Yeah, so in other words, they're looking for trauma, but they did not find it. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay, so let's go to these findings again. Here in number 2, there's normal pressure hydrocephalus. We've talked about that. But there are a couple other things. Normal aging brain, Alzheimer's dementia, subcortical arteriosclerotic encephalopathy, multi-infarct dementia. Did I read all that correctly?
You did.
And those are some big words. Can you comment on those to help the jury understand what these are doing in this report?
Well, some of these are clinical descriptors, which would require a neurologist to make a correlation by examining that patient, because imaging can show a lot of things that don't necessarily manifest in someone clinically. So it's important to always take it into clinical context. The one description here that actually reflects underlying pathology would be the arteriosclerotic encephalopathy. That's just a big word for diseases of the blood vessels, specifically plaque or hardening of the arteries. The comprehensive workup that was done at the Veterans Administration in 2009 did show evidence of vascular disease at that time in the carotid arteries, in the neck, and also in the brain. And at that time, the white matter disease, which again was present over a decade later, was attributed to vascular disease.
Did you see any evidence in the imaging that correlates with vision problems?
No. There was mention of it with the functional MRI, but that is beyond my expertise.
Okay, you'd leave that to a neurologist to speak to, or somebody else?
Somebody has who expertise in functional imaging.
Okay. Okay, so we can take this down, I think. Did you note anything in the, well, let me ask first, are you aware that Dr. Gibby actually met with Mr. Sanderson?
I'm aware of that.
And is there anything about that meeting that has any bearing on your opinions today?
The only bearing it would have is that Dr. Gibby makes mention in his report that he had told Mr. Sanderson that it's possible you could go through all of this workup and not find any evidence of post-traumatic brain injury.
And why would that be significant to you?
Simply because obviously the intent of that workup was to specifically look for evidence of brain injury.
I believe the jury's heard Dr. Gibby give an opinion that I want to see if you remember and what your comment might be, your response to it might be. If the images prior to the accident are similar to the post-accident imaging, in other words, if the imaging prior showed things that were post-accident, would that mean that you cannot say the prior findings were caused by the accident?
Objection leading Ms. State's prior testimony.
As to leading sustained?
Okay, so do you recall Dr. Gibby giving an opinion that if the pre-accident findings the post-accident findings are found in the pre-accident imaging, that you could not say that the post-accident imaging was caused by the accident?
Objection leading.
Sustained?
Okay. What do you recall Dr. Gibby saying about the relationship between the pre-accident imaging and the post-accident imaging?
My opinion on that would be based on his deposition. If you'd like, I can read 2 areas of his deposition that I think answer your question.
Sure, go ahead.
So,
Objection, you're saying?
Sustained?
Okay, so let's just ask you this question. Do you have any opinions about whether the post-accident imaging findings can be attributed to, from an imaging perspective, the collision, the ski collision?
Objection leading.
Overruled?
we ask that again.
Yes. Do you have any opinions about whether the post-accident imaging findings can be attributed to the collision?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
that those findings predate the accident and date back to at least 2009, as confirmed by a comprehensive imaging workup of Mr. Sanderson's brain performed at the Veterans Administration Hospital.
And so do you believe those post-accident, I apologize that I keep messing this up. You believe that those post-accident imaging findings are in any way related to the collision?
No.
And what was the reason for that 2009 workup, to your knowledge?
Unfortunately, Mr. Sanderson had suffered a retinal artery occlusion, a central retinal artery occlusion that resulted in blindness in one eye. And so he was undergoing a workup for risk factors that would relate to that.
Okay. And do you know any of the people that have done any of his imaging?
I'm familiar with him, yes.
Yeah, and so that 2009 workup, or do you know the people that did that workup?
Yes.
And do you trust the findings that they came to?
They're very experienced and well-trained, yes.
Okay, great. That's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. Mr. Bueller?
I'm going to start at the end. You're not an eye doctor, are you?
I'm not.
And you said the imaging.
That's delivering on our commitment and demonstrating the power of democracy. Angola is taking steps to build sharing, creating three new regional courts.
You never conducted an exam of the client, Terry Sanderson.
No.
You understand there was a sudden change after the ski crash in Terry Sanderson's condition, brain health.
From my review of the records, that's my understanding.
You understand that through, you read before and after witnesses who confirmed there was a sudden change after the collision, correct?
Do you mind asking that again?
Did you read before and after witness testimony? You
No.
didn't. So you didn't read. Isn't before and after witness testimony important to understanding someone's brain injury?
I think it's very important, but it was beyond the scope of what I was to do. I concentrated only on his imaging.
Okay, so you didn't have the before and after information that would improve the diagnosis that you might, or the opinions you might give today in court to this jury.
I understood that with respect to the imaging, we were looking for evidence of brain trauma as would manifest on imaging, and so that's where I concentrated my focus.
Well, you said that MTBI may not be shown on an MRI, true?
A mild brain injury?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so Dr. Sanderson could have a brain injury mild traumatic brain injury and it not be shown up on imaging, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the 2009 imaging, it was asymptomatic, true?
Again, I don't understand. I'm not the clinician who examined him at that time, and I can only look at his imaging in the context of the information, so I don't feel qualified to answer your question.
Thank you. So from the imaging from 2009, 2017, 2021, there's no change, right?
Very little change.
Okay. Dr. Black, no one's given a diagnosis that Terry Sanderson has clinical NPH or normal pressure hydrocephalus, true?
I don't know that for sure.
Okay. So the NPH was not clinically diagnosed by his VA doctors, as far as you know, correct?
As far as I know, it was only suggested, well, it was suggested in most of his imaging studies, but I don't know what clinical correlation was made.
Okay, and so clinical correlation means that some specialist at the VA or elsewhere that understood his NPH was showing symptoms, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you don't need pathological evidence of to have a MTBI, correct?
When you say pathological, are you saying imaging evidence?
Yes.
That's correct.
So, Dr. Black, imaging can show a lot that that hasn't really manifested or shown up, correct?
Will you state that one more time?
Okay. Imaging can show a lot of things that hasn't shown up in a clinical setting. No,
Yes, correct.
so Terry could have these problems that show up on imaging, but there's no symptoms that would affect him from, or stop him from skiing, for instance.
It's possible, yes.
Okay. And in general, you would prefer to have an actual exam of the patient to render your opinions true?
I think that imaging correlated with a clinical exam is the correct way to assess a patient's condition.
So you would prefer to have an exam, correct?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
prefer, I mean, I think they correlate.
Okay.
The information's valuable in both circumstances, but optimally in decision-making, you want both types of information.
And so your opinions are not as strong as they would be without this exam, right?
Without a clinical exam,
Yeah.
my opinions are certainly limited to his imaging.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Bueller. Mr. Egan?
Dr. Black, you were asked about before and after witnesses, the family members, people close to Mr. Sanderson before and after the accident.
I'm not sure I understood that question, but
Okay, well,
You can-
my question is just whether opinions from such witnesses would affect your read of the objective findings in the images.
no, they would not.
And what about if you actually met with Mr. Sanderson, would that change the objective findings in the images?
No, because I would defer to a neurologist or a neuropsychologist, someone who with that kind of expertise to evaluate Mr. Sanderson. My area of expertise is in brain imaging.
Do you typically evaluate patients when you read their imaging?
With regard to brain imaging, no.
And then after, let's see, I guess we did show one of these boards, but you didn't get to see it. I want to make sure you see it so the jury knows that you've seen
Okay.
it. And I'll show you. This is 101G, and these are are these the same images we were looking at on the screen?
Yes.
And they show that before there was a finding that was also after the collision, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so I think the jury's already seen that. And then we also have two more boards which we didn't show. Your Honor, I move to admit 101H and 101I for demonstrative purposes.
No objection.
Defense Exhibit 101H and 101I, or is this plaintiff's exhibits?
These are ours, yes.
Your defense exhibits are received for demonstrative purposes?
So I'll show you first, Dr. Black. Is this the same idea as the board we just saw?
Yes.
Okay, just with different findings.
Yes.
Okay, and then that was 101H, and this is,
Objection beyond the scope.
Ruled?
and then this is 101I. And it's the
Yes.
same idea.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just show the jury, 101H, 101I. And then my last question for you, Dr. Black, is whether after questioning from Mr. Bueller, you have your opinions about these objective findings you've been discussing on the imaging changed?
They have not.
Okay, thank you.
Earlier, you said you preferred to have objective findings from a neurologist or neuropsychologist, correct?
For clinical correlation, absolutely.
Yeah, for clinical correlation. Would you defer to someone like Dr. Goldstein?
I mean, I don't know him, so that name doesn't mean anything to me.
He's a neuropsychologist who testified in this trial. You didn't know that?
No.
So Dr. Goldstein provided clinical correlation, and that would help your opinions if you had that, true?
Sure. I mean, if somebody has expertise clinically that I don't have, but it doesn't change how I interpret the images or my view of these findings.
So your opinions are limited to your view of the images and not the clinical findings, true?
Correct.
Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Egan,
That's all, Your Honor.
you may be excused. Thank you.
You can call our next witness, or take a brief break.
Is this witness going to take a bit?
Robert Hosch.
Hesh.
Hesh, sorry, and I would think, I could be on and off in a half hour, I think.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and take a break because there will be cross-examination, I'm sure. We'll take a recess now. We're ready for the jury. Once you let them know, whenever they're done. They're still cycling through, I think.
Your Honor, could we wait a few minutes for the warrants to be back?
Yes. So maybe just have them hold at the door. Sure. Yeah, they're still doing a few things, Mr. Sykes. But
Technically, I think
we'll have to have you be sworn in. Why don't you take a seat out in the gallery?
that chair too short to you.
The bailiffs worked on the chair. I think the chair's in good shape now. Okay, whenever the jury is ready, we're ready. Yes. They're not quite ready either, so. Thank you. Mr. Owens, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, we call Robert Hesch to the stand.
Thank you. Dr. Hesch, if you could come right up here to the clerk and be sworn in.
Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Good morning. If you could start by stating your full name and spell it out for us.
My name is Robert Hesch, Roberthoesch.
Doctor, nice to see you. What city do you live in?
Salt Lake.
I'm gonna take this off. I do have a cold, but what's your current position?
I'm currently the Chief Medical Officer for Intermountain Healthcare in Utah and Idaho.
Does that mean you're the top MD for all of Intermountain Healthcare?
In Utah and Idaho.
Okay. You're pretty young, aren't you? How old are you?
48.
When I hired you on this case, you didn't have such a prestigious title, did you?
No, I did not.
What were you?
I was a neurologist at Intermountain Medical Center and the leader of our neurosciences program at Intermountain.
Good for you. To be clear, you are not here on behalf of Intermountain Healthcare, is that right?
Correct. My opinions are my own.
Thank you. All right. Just undergrad, where was that briefly?
Undergrad, University of Maryland, College Park.
In what subject?
Cell and molecular biology and genetics.
What a nerd.
I am a neurologist.
Kidding. Poli-sci is the nerd thing. All right, good for you. And then your MD degree was where?
University of Maryland in Baltimore.
And what did you choose to specialize in?
Neurology.
Okay, and how many years? So 4 years undergrad, 4 years med school, then how many more years?
Well, then I did a PhD for 4 years as well in that time, and then went across town to Hopkins for my neurology residency. So that was another 4 years.
What a nerd. All right, 4 years in postdoctorate. What's that in?
Neurology.
Okay.
And then 2 more years as a fellowship in neurocritical care.
But did you say there were years after undergrad before med school?
No, it was during med school. I did my PhD.
Okay, not all MDs do PhDs too?
Correct.
Okay, that's a lot of training. Fellowship was in what specifically?
Neurocritical care.
All right, so neuro critical care. This is like when people are hit their head and they're in big trouble,
That's correct.
or they get a stroke, they're in big trouble.
That's right.
They call you in, and sometimes you think you're gonna go swimming for fun, and you just get called in for like 14 hours straight
That's right.
to work on one patient.
Right.
All right, married, kids.
Yes.
Have you reviewed some materials in this case?
I have.
All right, so the jury just heard from a neuroradiologist, and you are a neurologist. Okay, distinguish the two again really quick.
So a neuroradiologist reads images, MRIs, CTs, X-rays, all kinds of images of the brain and the spinal cord.
Okay, and you neurologists do what?
We diagnose and treat conditions of the nervous system, so brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves.
And then this afternoon, we're going to hear from a neuropsychologist. What's that?
A neuropsychologist diagnoses and treats disorders of consciousness and awareness and language that are related to neurological conditions.
And do the three of you work together on hard cases?
Yes.
And do you rely, for instance, upon a neuroradiologist and a neuropsychologist all the time?
Yes.
Okay. You know I was kidding when I said nerd. Really, I'm praising you in a backward way. I apologize if that sounded passive aggressive.
We call ourselves nerds. That's okay.
All right. You were here for Dr. Black's testimony on the neuroradiology. Is that true?
Yes.
And one of his opinions was that Mr. Sanderson's brain problems that he complains of as a result of the collision were actually all pre-existing. Did you hear Dr. Black say that?
Yes, I did.
And do you agree with that opinion?
Yes, I do.
Let's talk about what you've reviewed. So I think yesterday you told me you had received some 3,000 pages of junk. Just kidding. Materials, right?
Correct.
And a big chunk of those were medical records and a big chunk of those were depositions.
Correct.
And then you also received a lot of images before and after.
That's correct.
And did you review all of that?
Yes, over several years.
Do you believe you have foundation to render the opinions you're about to render in this case?
Yes, I do.
In addition to what you've reviewed, your background, education, training, and experience, do you believe that all comes to bear in rendering the opinions you're about to give?
Yes.
So, Your Honor, I think this will be most efficient. He's prepared a written report that has some headings, and I would like to just go to and have James bring up just the headings.
Well, it hasn't been admitted into evidence. I think he can just read them. I don't think he has to show the jury anything.
Are we talking about a demonstrative exhibit to illustrate this witness's testimony?
No.
No, we're talking about just the headings of his report,
All right.
Reports are admissible.
not admitting them.
Agreed, but I think it might be efficient to do it that way. It's no different than the witness walking up to a chalkboard and writing the words out on a board. So I'm fine with it. If you just show the headings.
Thank you. So, did you prepare a written report, by the way?
Yes, and I have it with me.
And it's broken down into some headings?
Yes.
And I thought this would be helpful. Can you read heading number 1?
The persisting neurological symptoms Mr. Sanderson reports since the February 2016 ski accident are likely attributable to pre-existing health conditions.
Okay. Is that indeed your opinion?
Yes.
And on what is it based?
So based on my review of the records, his mental health professionals that evaluated him before and after, if you look at the trajectory of those evaluations, it looks essentially the same before and after. Also based on review of the imaging, and afterwards the neuropsychology testing that was normal or above normal compared to population.
Okay, let's hit all of them, and then we'll go back if needed. Are you able to bring up 2? Well, he brings up number 2. Comment upon the patient's pre-existing injuries. Which ones did you find particularly important?
The pre-existing condition of depression is the salient
Okay.
existing condition.
And how is it that his pre-existing depression and anxiety is related to his complaints of post-collision symptoms?
So the depression and anxiety can cause all of the symptoms that he is complaining of post-collision. And if you look at the records and you were able to remove the collision, just so just make it evaporate, the history reads coherently. This is a
Okay.
man in his 70s with depression and anxiety, and it's gotten bad enough to the point that it's impairing memory and concentration and other activities that he was used to doing.
So is another way of saying that if we removed the collision, he never had a collision that day, it still makes sense, his trajectory?
Right. If you read the medical records from before the injury through now, and you remove the injury, it doesn't change the trajectory of his complaints.
So
his
for
evaluation
instance-
by his health professionals.
For instance, if we look at his medical record, let's say just 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, did you know he went to the VA doctor that day?
Yep.
With complaints of, I'm feeling really old, I can't do what I used to be able to do. That was pre-injury, correct?
Correct.
And then you compare it to his records even soon after the collision. You're saying it doesn't really show anything happened, correct?
Hasn't changed his course.
Okay. And whenever you're ready, James. Can you read your opinion number 2?
The only neurological problems Mr.
Your
Sanders.
Honor, I object to reading a report to the jury. You can tell it, no problem with that, but you shouldn't be reading it.
We already dealt with this.
Yeah, overruled, I think I ruled on it.
Go ahead.
The only neurological problems Mr. Sanderson has had may be partly The only neurological problems Mr. Sanderson has had that may be partly attributable to the ski accident are those associated with the mild concussion he experienced during the accident.
Okay, can you fill in the meat on those bones? Help us understand that a little.
Yes, so my opinion is if he had a concussion, it was very mild. More likely than not, I would say 95% or more that he would have made a full recovery from that concussion within a few weeks, not more than 99% within a few months based on the severity of the concussion. So
I think he's saying I'm in that like 1%. I'm not in the 95 and the 99%. How do you respond to that?
So I would say if, as a neurologist, I have patients that come in, they complain of cognitive symptoms, memory loss, attention problems, difficulty doing things that they used to do, and they can have depression and anxiety. They may have early signs of dementia. Those things are far more common for someone in Mr. Sanderson's category. Man in their 70s, they don't feel the way that they used to feel like they're getting old, like he said before the accident, or after the accident, concerned that they may be getting Alzheimer's disease. So I think those things are far more likely than a very minor concussion causing symptoms 7 years later.
Do you see hundreds of those patients a year who've never had a ski collision?
Correct.
Okay, any other comment on your opinion number 2 that you would like to make?
No, I think that concludes it.
Thank you. James is going to bring up number 3. And do you have it there?
I do. Should I just read it?
Start reading it. There you go.
The neurological problems associated with the mild concussion Mr. Sanderson may have experienced resolved within months. They were not permanent, as plaintiff's experts claim.
Okay, mild concussion. You weren't here, but did you hear Dr. Edgley testify or read his deposition?
I've read the deposition.
All right. So did he talk about, hey, a couple things we look at is length of...
Objection, this states facts, there's no deposition.
Sustained.
Okay, comment, I did misspeak, I forgot you didn't take his deposition. Is there some importance in determining the severity of concussion in terms of how long they're unconscious? Is that a factor?
Yeah, length of amnesia, length of loss of consciousness, or length of confusion.
All right. I think those were the same 3 he said. All right. What do you know about length of unconsciousness?
From my assessment, looking through the records, I don't think that there was loss of consciousness.
Okay. Even if there was some loss of consciousness, it would have been brief. Is that fair?
Seconds, yeah.
And let's see, in terms of, I think, to be fair, I think Mr. Ramon said he was spread eagle, head down, out cold, over 2 minutes. I just want to put that in the record. Not substantiated by any other witness, but did you at least observe that?
Yeah,
Well, Your Honor, I object. He's not competent to assess someone's credibility, and he wasn't there.
That's what I'm going
Testify
to.
about that.
Why don't you clarify your question?
Yeah. What do you know about that? Isn't that someone saying longer period of unconsciousness?
Your Honor, he can't comment on.
I'm actually trying to help the plaintiff. Go ahead.
He's not asking you to comment on whether you believe the witness. He's asking if you remember reading that.
I do.
Okay. Is the significant time to be unconscious, is that 5 minutes or over?
Yes.
All right. And then comment, you said period of amnesia. What do you understand on that? Length of amnesia. What do you understand?
The period of time that the person that has the injury is not able to remember either before or after the event.
All right. And are you acknowledging that Mr. Sanderson had a mild concussion?
More likely than not, he did. He had headache in one of the, I think it was the Instacare report, and so that would be consistent with a mild concussion.
And it resolved within months? What do you base that on?
I believe there was a report where he said it's getting better.
Okay, and they are not permanent, as plaintiffs claim. Please comment.
Correct. So the head injury was very mild. I mean, it fell in the most mild category of concussion, so kind of a grade 1. And the rest of the symptoms that he has, what could be caused by other conditions, which I would say are more common.
And do you believe that more likely than not, that is why he continues to have some symptoms?
Yes.
In other words, not because of the ski collision, but just because of his aging progressive brain.
Correct.
Let's read your fourth opinion. There are a total of 6, by the way. And the latter 2, we might just touch on briefly.
So the fourth opinion is that Mr. Sanderson does not currently need ongoing neurological treatment.
That's related to the ski collision.
That's related to the ski collision. So I have to modify that slightly because this report was written before the assessment by Dr. Goldstein was available to me.
Right. Goldstein, I think, recommended some care with regard to dementia.
Correct.
Did you hear that personally?
I didn't hear it personally, but I read it in his actual report from when he evaluated Mr. Sanderson.
Do you believe Mr. Anderson to have sort of dementia symptoms?
Yes.
Your Honor, it's never evaluated him. Can't possibly comment on that without a clinical evaluation.
That's a speaking objection.
No foundation.
Is it in the report?
Do you have symptoms? So he's commenting on his further needs, and he's commenting on Sam Goldstein.
There's nothing in the
Why don't you
report-
ask a question,
Nothing in the
then we'll
report about it,
see.
Judge.
Go ahead and ask your next question.
Okay, so you said Mr. Sanderson does not currently need ongoing neurologic treatment, true?
Correct. That's what the report says.
Okay, since you wrote this, did you then read Sam Goldstein's updated opinion?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Can't offer new opinions.
Sustained.
Thank you.
Is there a drug that treats dementia?
Yes.
What is that called?
It's called
Your
Aricept.
Honor, I object. There's no opinion on dementia.
Sustained?
Thank you.
Why is it your opinion that Mr. Sanderson does not currently need ongoing neurologic treatment related to the ski injury is the addition you made?
The ski injury caused a mild concussion, more likely than not, that was self-limited. And his ongoing symptoms are more likely due to ongoing pre-existing conditions and possibly new conditions.
Let's bring up, if we can, D106.
Has it been received?
I don't think so.
No, it has not.
D106.
Any objection?
Can I see it? Oh. This is for demonstrative purposes only? Sure. Okay, next we can also write on it, can we not?
Why don't we address that if we need to
Thank
later?
you. There's a
So-
lot missing.
Defendant's Exhibit 106 is received for demonstrative purposes.
And do you have it in front of you? May I approach mine? I want to make sure you can see it. And James, if you can bring it up, that would be good. So I think you might see it right on your monitor.
Okay.
D106, James. All right,
I got it.
you see it?
Yep.
I won't get you a hard copy then. Have you had a chance to read this document?
Yes.
And do you agree with it?
Yes, I do.
It's entitled Mr. Sanderson's Brain Imaging Both Before and After Ski Collision. Did it show atrophy, loss of brain cell sign of aging brain before and after?
Yes.
Did his images, I actually have a roaming microphone, but maybe it needs to be higher up. Volume loss, diminishing brain size, sign of aging brain. Did he have this before and after?
Your Honor, I object to this testimony.
Or do you personally read them?
I look at the films, then I can confirm with their report, and then I bring it together with what we see clinically.
So I think the objection is somehow that you're not competent to talk about the imaging before versus after. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree.
And how so?
So I've looked at the images. These are pretty standard MRI images that we see every day, and a major part of my practice as an outpatient neurologist was evaluating patients for dementia and specifically NPH. Saw hundreds of patients with the question of whether they had NPH.
Which is that hydrocephalus?
It's the hydrocephalus at the bottom.
All right, so is it true that neuroradiologists essentially serve you? They don't personally talk to patients. You order the neuroradiologist to do a study, then it comes back to you, and you are the one who's face-to-face with the patient.
Correct.
Lee?
I translate the.
Just a second, sir, I'm sorry. Sustained as to leading?
Okay, have I established sufficient foundation?
This does have the scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge that'll help the jury, so you may proceed.
Okay, we talked about atrophy and volume loss. In large ventricles, a ventricle is what in the brain? Is that like at Halloween when we see a mold of a brain? It's the little gooey stuff going out? You tell me.
No.
Okay. I was
It's
totally
the
wrong.
inside the brain. There's fluid-filled sacs that contain spinal fluid. So
Okay.
it's the black thing in the middle on the MRI that Dr. Black went through.
All right, and is that like the main blood feeding the brain? What are they?
No,
What purpose do the ventricles serve?
they buoy the brain, so it prevents the brain from having as much shock when we just move around in everyday life.
All right. Chronic microvascular disease, is that something he had before and after?
Yes, that was described by Dr. Black.
Is that associated with cognitive decline?
It can be.
And why does he have that? Is that from this stroke event years earlier, or just bad luck, or eating too many donuts, or what?
I think it's a combination of his high blood pressure and high cholesterol with a little bit of genetics that makes our blood vessels harder than average.
White matter disease, we've talked about that a little bit. It says they're damage to nerve fibers associated with memory, balance, and mobility issues. Did he have that before and after?
Yes.
And is that progressive in nature?
It didn't look that like unbelievably progressive. Looked stable over time.
And why did he have that? Was that associated with the stroke event?
No, I think it's probably associated with the chronic microvascular disease. The stroke event was in his eye.
No evidence of trauma before or after, is that true?
That's correct.
Concern for disease due to excess fluid buildup. That's the NPH. Was that a concern before and a concern after?
Yes.
Does he in fact have that condition?
So that would be a condition that I would need further clinical evaluation to determine, but his MRI would be consistent with that condition.
You mentioned earlier that his conditions are not permanent, as plaintiff's experts claim. And I just want to comment, do you believe Dr. Fong to have used unreliable science to make some of her opinions?
Objection, leading,
Sustain
No foundation.
its irrelevance.
irrelevant.
Nope.
So if I sustain an objection, just hold on. Sorry. Thanks.
They're about to get up and criticize you for not seeing this patient. Why didn't you? Why wouldn't you? Why would it be necessary if you needed to?
Yep, well, I would always be willing, and actually didn't know that was an option. But in this case, and with many patients in my practice, we review tons of records before we see them. And actually, Mr. Sanderson probably had 10 times the amount of records that I have before I see my patients in clinic. You said 3,000 pages and lots of imaging. So I can know with 90% certainty going in based on the before and after imaging, the neuropsych testing over a period of years, his reports over time. I can know with 90% accuracy what's going on. So if I went in there, I'd be trying to figure out, does he have NPH or not? And what can I do to help him with his depression, anxiety, and other memory problems?
Would you be treating him or evaluating the ski injury?
No, I'd be providing counseling that the ski injury was not part of it.
Now, you refer people all the time to neuropsychologists, is that true?
Yes,
And we're about to hear from two. But you did have the benefit of multiple neuropsychologist exams at the VA, is that true?
correct.
And do you know them to be good neuropsychologists?
I don't know them.
Okay. Do you know them to be not hired by either side, his normal treating providers?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And these were voluminous evaluations, were they not?
Yes.
And what did they conclude?
They were essentially normal, and they showed that he was performing above average.
Now, is that above average for everyone on the street or for 75-year-old men with college educations or what?
For a 75-year-old man with college educations and
Okay,
with a high baseline.
So in some places even like near superior
Correct.
levels.
Yes.
So I'm gonna grab one thing. I think the jury's seen various neuropsych overviews, but do you agree he was tested in tens and tens and tens of categories?
Yes.
Did you see any of them below average?
No.
Did you see many above average?
Yes.
IQ, for instance, was 114, is that right?
That's my recollection.
And for like a 75-year-old man with a college education, is that good?
Yeah, it's above average.
Okay, what's average again?
100.
Okay. Now, I think they're gonna say, hey, the family members are saying, we're noticing he's angrier than he used to be, or that he can't drive and read at the same time. There's things he can't multitask with. Can you comment on that?
So, in people like Mr. Sanderson who are high functioning at baseline, above average IQ, superior in some categories like you described, a drop in functioning might still look like he's really high functioning compared to the average population. And the family will pick up on some of these changes, right? They see what they see. Yeah, that concludes that.
So if you did meet with Mr. Sanderson and he kept obsessively bringing up, I think the ski collision caused this, what would you say?
I would say that it's my job as a neurologist to help him accept that that's not part of what he's experiencing now. Way more likely than not, he has a history of depression and anxiety. We know he continues to be anxious, so that needs treatment. And I would, evaluate for dementia, like we said, as would be indicated by his imaging.
Okay.
And so my job is to help the patient and family gain acceptance that this mild event 7 years ago isn't causing all these problems that he's having now.
Or any of them.
Right.
Didn't you tell me the cure for Mr. Sanderson is the end of this lawsuit?
Correct.
Objection, Your Honor. No foundation, relevance, improper questioning.
Overruled.
Go ahead. Is that your opinion?
Yeah, I felt anxious
Your Honor,
coming here.
I also object to that. It's not in his report. Nowhere to be found.
Overruled.
Go ahead, just explain that, and then I'm sitting down.
The suing somebody, going through a trial that has, national recognition can bring on a lot of anxiety. And if you're prone to that, it's gonna make it worse, and it's gonna slow your recovery.
His daughter said this notoriety makes him feel powerful. Did you read that in Jenny's deposition?
I did.
Objection, Your Honor. Jenny's deposition is not in evidence.
Sustained. Is it coming into evidence, counsel?
If we have time, we're gonna read it in.
Well,
It's
You
been
can't-
referenced multiple
Ain't
times.
here yet.
if you're planning to ask this witness about evidence that's not part of the case, or won't be part of the case, then it's an improper question.
Okay, if he's read it as part of his opinions, experts can rely upon hearsay.
They can.
Yeah, but it's not referenced in his report, Your Honor.
Well, if it's not in his report, then sustained.
Okay, I'll let you go. Thank you.
Mr. Sykes.
Steve, you want this one? Doctor, do you commonly render opinions on your patients without a clinical exam?
No.
In the last 100 patients that you've seen, or that are referred to you, how many have you rendered opinions on for other doctors without an examination, a clinical exam?
So we do have conversations with other doctors where they say, hey, what do you think about this case? And I may render an opinion without seeing the patient. But if it's my own patient, then it's part of my standard evaluation to see them.
If it's your own patient, your last 1,000 patients that were your own patients, you would never render opinions about them without a clinical exam. Is that a fair statement?
No,
Never.
I would form an opinion, but I wouldn't create a treatment plan and execute on it without seeing them.
So a clinical exam, would you agree,
for this jury is an important factor for a physician.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Did you read the opinion of Dr. Edgley, testified yesterday?
No, I did not.
Okay. If he called a clinical exam the gold standard for a physician, would you agree or disagree with that?
I think it misstates his testimony.
Overruled as to relevance, the jury will recall the testimony of Dr. Edgley.
Well, in all honesty, he didn't say it in his testimony, he said it in his report. I'm asking if he said it in his report, would that make a difference?
Your
Trying to be
Honor,
honest
that's
here.
referencing testimony that's not, there are no facts and evidence.
I will draw the question.
Thank you.
But would you agree, excuse me, that a clinical examination is the gold standard for a physician who's treating somebody?
I'm not sure what a gold standard means.
Pretty
but
important.
It's a big part of my evaluation.
Excuse me. Secondly, I'd looked through your opinion pretty carefully. It was about 4 or 5 pages. I noted, if you're handy, yeah. Well, I'll just ask you if you remember this. It's on my computer. But you had a list of things that you reviewed, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell this jury a summary of what Carlene Davidson said in her deposition about Terry before and after the ski crash?
I can't from memory.
Okay? Can you tell the jury what Holly Gresham, the daughter, said about Terry before and after the ski crash?
Yes, I did read Miss Gresham's deposition this weekend, or her statement.
But you didn't read Carlene Davidson?
I think I did, but I can't remember all the names. If you want to show it to me, I can comment on it.
Tell the jury, if you can, what important information about Terry before and after the ski crash Polly Gresham said.
So she feels that he, is not as engaged and able to do things in the way that he used to. I think that's probably the summary.
That's a pretty mild statement of it, isn't it? Didn't in fact she say, Polly Gresham, daughter, excuse me, that there was a marked and sudden difference in her father in a wide variety of areas: personality, executive functioning, social problems, after the ski crash, almost immediately. Didn't she say that?
I'm not sure she said executive functioning, but the rest of it sounds familiar.
Did you read Shay Harris' deposition?
Remind me of the relationship?
Daughter,
No, I did not.
okay? Those three are listed, and did you read or not read Carlene Davidson?
I read it, but I can't remember what it says.
You read it, but you can't remember it. Tell the jury if Shay Harris is listed there as one you had. S-H-A-E.
I don't see it.
One second, brother.
publishing our report, Your Honor?
Let me show you what you wrote.
Can we move to admit our report?
Just for illustrative purposes, I want to show him what he wrote.
I guess I don't, you may be opening the door to the report.
You want to do that? Okay? Take a look at it. Items 4, L, M, and N.
Correct. I don't see Shay Harris, like you said. I think that was the question.
Okay? You know what? You're right. I don't see her there. I do see Carlene and Polly. So, the defense did not give you Shay Harris, right?
Correct.
Hypothetically, if Shay said there was a very, very sudden change in my dad, before and after, for what we call neuropsychological symptoms, would that make a difference in your opinion?
It might have made a difference at the time,
Okay?
but at this point in time, it would not.
Carlene Davidson testified. She was the second witness in the trial last week. Does this ring a bell that she was living with Terry for about a year and a half before the ski accident? Does that ring a bell?
That does.
And she was up here about 300 days a year in Salt Lake.
From St.
Yeah.
George, right? That was, yeah.
And they also spent time in St. George together.
Yep.
And they went on international trips together.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes.
Do you think she would get to know him pretty well during that time?
Yes.
She testified that there was a rapid and severe change in Terry after the ski crash. That lasted, and she stayed with him for 6 months and then they parted ways. She said she was heartbroken. She was hoping for a marriage out of this.
Your Honor, just compound.
Sustained?
Okay? She was hoping for a marriage out of this. Do you remember that in her deposition?
Yes.
Yeah. But he changed fundamentally after the ski crash. Now, does that make a difference in your opinions at all?
I mean, it would be part of the whole compendium of what I would put together. Yes.
I didn't read anything about that. I read your report. It's about 4 pages. Aside from their depositions that you referenced, you don't say anything at all in your report about the rapid and fundamental changes that occurred to Terry after the ski crash, do you? Don't even mention them. Is that correct?
That's good.
Now, are you familiar with the term executive functioning?
Yes.
Is that something that neurologists use, a term that neurologists use?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. Because you realize, of course, as a neurologist, that you can have massive changes in a person with a mild TBI that don't show up on imaging, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier in your testimony. And a category of those changes is called executive functioning, right?
That is one manifestation, potentially, yes.
It's one category.
Yeah.
And I didn't see the word executive functioning even addressed in your report. Not even a mention, correct?
Sorry, is that a question? Or
Yeah, correct.
What's the question?
With a inflection for a question, yes.
Is it in my report?
Yeah.
No, it's not in the report.
Okay. Hey, Pete, would you turn this off? Thanks. Now, while he's doing that, could you define for the jury executive functioning
It's
in a medical sense?
the ability to do things, to start actions and carry through with them.
To start actions into what? I'm sorry.
Carry the actions through.
True, yeah. That's self-regulated, self-directed action, right?
Correct.
Okay? and that people use that to manage their affairs effectively.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Have you heard of Sam Goldstein?
I mean, I know of his report as I testified earlier, and I read some of his deposition. Actually saw his testimony.
He testified here. And by the way, were you aware that he is a world-renowned neuropsychologist from Salt Lake City?
Yes.
Yeah. And he developed an executive function test.
Correct.
Can you see it on your screen there?
I do.
Yeah. And here's what he recorded with a high confidence level. That this man, Terry Sanderson, who was a former captain in the United States Army, ran eye clinics for the Army, has an advanced degree in optometry, which I think is a 4-year degree, if I'm not mistaken, and ran 2 clinics in southern Idaho. Okay? Would that indicate to you a man of superior intelligence and executive function?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see what he did here. Okay? On attention, he was in the 25th percentile. Does that strike you as strange, or just average, by the way? 25th percentile. In other words, out of 100 people, he's 25 lowest, right?
That's correct.
That's what that means. Yeah.
Yep.
That for a man of his attainment, he's only the 25th percentile on attention? World-renowned neuropsychologist recorded this. Does that strike you as odd?
Strikes me as him having issues like we talked about. He
Let's
has
go to,
medical condition.
I'm sorry. I'll skip emotional just to,
I was saying, I think, these are data and they're good data, and it reinforces my stance that Mr. Sanderson needs help. He's got depression and anxiety, and I think this could be consistent with dementia as well.
okay? By the way, let me show you our exhibits. Your Honor, did we get the court one of these?
No.
Is that this?
Yes.
It's just an exhibit notebook here. May I approach?
Do you have the number of that?
Yeah, it was 43.
Sir, could I just ask what date this is?
Okay.
So,
Was this 2021?
Dr. Foundation to the witness, Your Honor.
Overruled. Okay. I lay before you defense exhibits and plaintiff's exhibits. Can you show us where there's a diagnosis of dementia? This is going back to 2009 and up through, I think, 2021.
What hasn't been made yet?
Hasn't been made. Okay. So,
Because we're,
you would agree, for the jury's help here, despite the fact that we're in a very important worldwide case, okay, like you mentioned, kind of, can't paraphrase in your words. There's no diagnosis of dementia.
hasn't been made yet, yeah, because we're talking about a minor brain injury that happened in 2016
Okay.
and not allowing him to move on to have a true diagnosis.
Let's talk about flexibility. Exhibit 43. Low average, 23rd percentile for flexibility of a man who ran 2 clinics in southern Idaho. Does that sound really low?
Sounds low,
Yeah.
yeah.
By the way, you asked me the date. I think this was done in 2020.
Okay.
You can check that, please. I think it's 2020. Okay. It's just a couple. Organization. Now, the ability to organize things is a very important part of executive function, isn't it?
Correct.
Very important part. 3rd percentile. 3rd percentile. Now, I'm just a simple country lawyer. If that were me, I'd understand it. But I didn't run 2 clinics. Okay?
Yeah.
Third percentile, does that strike you as indicative of something wrong here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Planning, and by the way, below average. Excuse me, planning, 4th percentile, below average. Does that strike you as very low for a man of his attainment?
Very low.
Self-monitoring, 10%. That strike you as very low for a man of his attainment.
It does.
What about working memory? For a man who did everything he did, working memory.
It's low.
All right, now,
Can we make one more comment on that, by the way?
Well-
Or do you want to move on?
let's just move on.
It's related to Goldstein's report.
What's that?
You know, my impression from Goldstein's report is that that's why he was recommending the cholinesterase inhibitor, is based on these kinds of findings.
Well,
Which is treatment for dementia.
if you don't remember specific things about his executive functioning from his family, do you?
No, I don't.
Yeah. Or from Carlene. But Carlene told this jury just a week ago that there was a major change in these things overnight, and she couldn't live with it. All right, now, excuse my cough here. I don't get a cold very often, but this is a killer. Did you see anywhere in these records? Okay, now, let me just preface this. Terry Sanderson has been a patient of Veterans Administration. He was a veteran,
Yep.
I think, since the early part of the century, early 2000s, when he moved down here from Idaho.
Right.
And he's got a lot of records there. And there are a lot of records that you read after February 26th of 2016, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, in those records, do you see anywhere where Terry Sanderson was accused of faking, malingering, or magnifying symptoms for money?
No, sir.
Nothing there, is there? Okay. No, where he says, I'm in it for the money.
No.
And did you read the reports of Goldstein, Fong, and Gibby?
I did. Yeah.
They're all treating physicians for him.
Correct.
You aware of that? Treating.
Yes.
Okay. They're all pretty competent, aren't they?
Yes.
Dr. Fong said she's treated thousands of patients with mild TBI. You aware of that?
I wasn't aware of the number, but I
Yeah.
know that she treats.
She
mild
missed
TBI.
trial here because she's lecturing over in Holland on what she does. She's lecturing in the Netherlands. You aware of that?
No, I'm not.
I think she was going to Spain after that. Anyway, and she said, and by the way, are you aware that these kind of doctors, at least the neuropsychologists, they give tests that have cleverly embedded tests for malingering? You aware of that?
I am. Yeah.
And neither the VA or these 3 doctors, for any suggestion of faking or malingering or magnification, or you aware of that?
Correct. I
Or,
agree.
or any suggestion that he's doing this for money.
Right. I didn't.
It's an insulting comment, but there's no suggestion of that, is there?
I didn't see any.
Do you think he's doing it for money?
I don't know. I have no opinion on that.
Thank you. Now, with respect to you had a thing up there about his scans, CT and MRI. Remember that chart?
Correct.
And you saw Dr. Black,
Yes, I did.
his testimony a few minutes ago?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And do you remember him saying that from 2009 through 2021, there's no indication of a change on these scans?
Correct.
Yeah. So there's no deterioration. That's the big point. He has hasn't deteriorated on the scans, has he?
Correct. That was Dr. Black's testimony.
And you agree that he had a mild concussion?
Correct. More likely than not.
Likely not. Okay, that's good enough. And you also agree that he's got, and I think in your report, you said, Mr. Owen said 1%, but you said 5% of people with this condition, mild traumatic brain injury, do not recover completely.
Correct.
Okay, now, do you think that an executive functioning outcome like that is more toward the 5%? What do you think?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
Okay. Is the fact that the people that love him, that know him the best, say there was a significant and sudden dramatic change in him after this ski crash, do you think that moves him more toward the 5%?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. You think the fact that no one has diagnosed him with any other condition like dementia moves him more toward the 5%?
No.
You think that the fact that no one's diagnosed him with faking, malingering, magnification moves him more toward the 5%?
No.
Okay. You talked about atrophy in the aging brain.
Yes.
Okay? That is a normal condition, right?
It can be.
And it's asymptomatic in many people.
It can be.
Okay? Yeah, one more question. I'll talk to my compatriots back here. Are you familiar with the pre-existing exacerbation issue medically with brain injury? In other words, let me explain that. If you have a pre-existing, let's say you have a problem with anger regulation or some other negative quality, okay? That oftentimes a TBI, even a mild TBI, can exacerbate those symptoms. You aware of that?
I am.
And that's a true principle of medicine, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, 1 second. Would you agree that a person who's had a concussion is at greater risk if they have another concussion? Second injury syndrome, they call it.
Yes.
Okay. That's all I've got, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Owens?
Your Honor, can you take this down? And James, are you hooked up? Thanks. In our last witness with Dr. Black, we actually referred to a document, plaintiff 33, page 8 and 9, and it was admitted. And we're gonna, and maybe just bring up just number 2, if you would. I don't know if are you able just to clear number 2? Do you remember, this is part of Dr. Fong's document?
Yes.
And do you recall plaintiff's counsel will say, show me in those records where it says the word dementia?
Yes.
All right, so let's look at this. The most likely diagnosis for this appearance is normal pressure hydrocephalus. The differential would include normal aging brain, Alzheimer's, dementia, subcortical arteriosclerotic encephalopathy,
Nice.
and multi-infarct dementia. All right, this
That was
is
good.
plaintiff's own retained expert,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And she's talking about, hey, could be some dementia stuff going on here, right?
Correct.
Objection. That's a differential diagnosis, and it doesn't suggest it's going on.
That's a speaking objection, Your Honor. It's inappropriate.
It's an inappropriate question.
Overruled, overruled. You can
Also,
cross-examine, the witness,
And
counsel.
then, Peter, if you can hear my voice, come back in. I had him go make some copies of another dementia reference that we'll pull up in just a minute. Do you remember any reference in the VA where the patient actually came to the doctor and said, I'm worried that I am getting dementia?
Yes.
And what do you recall? I think that might have been his treating psychiatrist, Michael McIntosh. Does this sound familiar?
I think that's right.
And-
We would
and-
see, yeah.
Do you recall, Peter's making copies, but do you recall what he responded?
I don't.
Okay, we'll pull that up in just a minute. In terms of how close these daughters were in their personal observations, did you observe that Polly Graham Sanderson had not even seen or talked to her dad for 3 months prior to this ski collision?
Yes.
Objection leading.
Sustained?
They all lived out of state, is that fair? All 3 daughters lived out of state from him.
No, that's beyond the scope.
It's,
Overruled?
Yes.
and he had, in fact, at the time of the ski collision, he wasn't running a 2-office optometry visit. He'd been retired many years, correct?
Correct.
And there's been evidence that he left on bad terms with his partners.
Objection, Your Honor. There's no evidence of that, and it's beyond scope,
Overruled?
and it's irrelevant.
Do you recall this?
I'm sorry, I don't recall that part.
That he left on poor terms. He left his community on poor terms, his business. I'll clarify my question. So I don't want just continuing speaking objections.
Sure. Right now, while we talk about this. Okay, I understand your issue that you think it's collateral impeachment and that it's beyond the scope of cross. I'm going to overrule the objections, but ask that there not be a lot of repetition. I think that the door was opened when this witness was asked about the before and the after from family. So,
I'm trying to recall my last question too, that was, the objection was sustained, or it was rejected. And then, but there was continuing talk and I never even got to ask it.
well, you'll have a few minutes to reorient yourself. Dr. Hish, you can certainly step down during the break.
Thank you.
You have the black man, but I'm not asking for something that happened. He's asking about what happened with his leaving his hometown. That he never let that in. And it's a collateral issue which I'm going to have to go into and consume time and waste. It makes no difference in the case. It was years before. Even if it's true.
I thought there was testimony of both parties. Well, I thought there was testimony of issues with when he left his business, that there were issues.
I don't think so. And so,
Your Honor,
and so, just let me finish.
Sure.
You know, he did what he said. I mean, we can't bring up Gwyneth Paltrow's,
No, I'm asking you to explain where, well, first of all, where did that come in?
Sure. It's in Terry's deposition, by the way. I think he even used the word like his partner had,
If it's in his
Cheap shot at him or something.
deposition, then it's not in the record.
only because I haven't been able to finish with Terry, but his own daughter, for instance, said he enjoyed a good reputation until his affair in that community. That was in the record. That's in
Was that in the
evidence.
record?
That's in evidence.
I think you sustained an objection to that, didn't you?
No.
I think you did.
No, it's in evidence because you were making him out to be just this beautifully respected man in the community, and his own daughter said, oh,
Well, I think,
Fair is one thing, but I mean,
business partner
but
problem.
I don't think that's come up, Judge. I'm saying it's wrong about it.
I know I've read it, I just don't know if it came out on the record. I don't think it did.
So I know it to be true because Mr. Sanderson
So-
actually, so I asked him, we're not proving truth necessarily right now. We're proving, did you see it in the
Right.
record? Because
Right.
they can testify as to what they've reviewed. And then I can follow up on it. So
I
it doesn't
think-
have to be in as a fact, as a fact.
I think under 403, I'll exclude it, that question.
Which one again, Your Honor?
About the-
business
yeah,
dispute?
business dispute.
Okay.
And, you know, like a certain amount of cross-examination with this witness, you know, and the closer it is to what the daughters observed or didn't observe, the closer it's tethered to that, the more relevant it is to responding to the cross that came out. But if you're, you know, to pull out, I guess, the defense's laundry list of complaints about the plaintiff, or not complaints, but points, I don't know that this is the appropriate place to do that, given the scope of direct.
All the family members are saying he had dramatic changes before, and
Right.
I've been saying, actually, they're pretty distant, and
Sure.
so
So questions that are tethered to those issues are fine.
okay, and just so we know what we're doing as soon as we go on, we're gonna present VA records 922 to 924.
And then what, so that's defense exhibits what?
And is this marked?
Are you introducing these, or are you just showing them?
I'm about to find out.
Some of these,
I just need to know if you're introducing them or I gave you an annotated one. I gave you that.
And just for the future, I'd like to reiterate that when you have an objection, all I need is objection and the rule. What rule? And if I need more information, I'll ask for it.
Yes, you can, go ahead.
So we have another few minutes to run down the rest of the.
Sure. We usually take about 10 minutes for these breaks. So. Any rulings of the court, any arguments of the lawyers, anything? That's going on, I would hate to have to ask, someone to leave. So if you could please keep your thoughts to yourself, keep your reactions or emotions, even your facial expressions, until the court's not in session. So thank you. We're ready. Mr. Owens, you may continue. Just to let you know, I've got another court hearing at noon.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm circulating Defense Exhibit 114. May I approach you?
You may.
Do you mind if I hand it to the witness?
You may.
We may get you a copy.
And it's Exhibit what?
114.
Okay.
D 114.
Did you say D as in dog?
D is in defendant, yes.
Okay. And does the plaintiff have any objection to this witness or this exhibit? Defendant's Exhibit 114D is received.
We're trying to blank out.
If you don't have time, you can go ahead and examine the witness without displaying it.
James, page 2 and 3 does not have Mr. Sanderson's address blanked out.
Yeah,
We want-
I blanked out.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're good. Have you seen this document?
I can't remember.
This is part of his VA records. It's dated May 22, 2017. Bottom right is marked VA 922.
Yes.
So if the incident was in February 2016, this is about a year and 3 months later. You with me?
Yes.
And if we go to the second page, VA 923, and James is gonna bring this up. You see under the subjective, and James, I think the address is there, so you wanna get rid of it. I'm gonna come show you where I'm gonna start reading. Patient reportedly.
Yes.
Okay, that's the first paragraph, and where's our cool laser? I'm gonna start, this is a big sentence, but I'm gonna start right here. Patient reportedly, and I'll read this, patient reportedly sought out neuropsychological testing for these symptoms, but also feared he may be experiencing early dementia symptoms. Mr. Sanderson noted that he felt reassured following the testing, but is still concerned regarding some of the cognitive changes he has experienced. So that's another reference to him being concerned with dementia. True?
True.
That's all on that. You can take that down, James. Executive function testing, does that rely on the patient? Some subjective reports from the patient.
I believe so, but I'll have to defer to our neuropsychology experts later today.
Okay, they're gonna come up here and talk about that, so we'll be okay with that. Patients can throw neuro testing though, can't they? Can
Yes.
they, like, fill in the tic-tac-toe, and the patient can actually say, I don't know.
Objection beyond scope.
Overruled?
Yes.
I mean, we can't force him to put a 0 where it belongs and an X where it belongs. Fair?
Correct.
And are you aware of studies that say being a litigant in a case like this actually frequently leads to patients overstating their damages?
Objection, 401, 403, and beyond scope.
Overruled?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Just comment on what you know on that.
So I would say it's more just knowing from medical school and learning about, what malingering is, as opposed to studies that you state.
Okay, malingering is a word that means basically not trying as hard. Is that fair?
Correct, for secondary gain.
If I malinger, if I have a stubborn cough that's malingering, is that the right use of that word?
No, it would be if you were elaborating your symptoms, like you said, not filling in the tic-tac-toe in order to have some type of secondary gain.
All right. What we do know is that he ran a business in Idaho many years earlier. True?
True.
Objection, Your Honor, same thing we talked about previously.
Overruled?
True.
And then he retired in part due to his failing eyesight. Do you know that?
I don't know that.
All right. And do you know anything about losing the respect of his community, which his daughter reported to this jury?
Objection, lead.
Overruled?
Sounds familiar, but I don't know the details on that.
Due to an affair he had. He thought.
Objection, Your Honor, 401, 403.
Sustained?
Thank you.
I think it's in evidence, and I think he should be able to reference it.
Same objection.
But I'll respect your ruling.
Okay.
Can anxiety and depression and hyperfixation, can they throw off executive functioning?
Yes.
All right. One thing Sam Goldstein said the other day was that he's obsessed. He's obsessed with this case, this notoriety, this media. Can that throw off if someone's obsessed, can that throw off their executive functioning?
Yes.
Objection, foundation.
Overruled?
Just comment on that for me, please.
Yeah, so being obsessed, being extremely anxious, or having other, being depressed, kind of that's a whole continuum, can cause a whole host of cognitive dysfunction, including executive function, but also problems with concentration, attention, memory, all the above.
I'm being told to sit down. I'm sitting down. Thank you.
Mr. Sykes?
Doctor, in that report that you have there, the progress note from the VA, May 22, 2017. I'm just looking at it, Exhibit 114. Okay.
Yes, sir.
This was the reason, read that to the jury, the reason for the visit.
Would you like me to read it? Oh,
Yeah.
scheduled psychotherapy intake.
Okay. And the chief complaint, anxiety, adjustment to medical condition. See that?
Yes.
Okay. And then on page 2, some of the things that weren't read. Let me see if I can get those up there. Let's see. No. It says subjective. Now, Mr. Owens read you part of that. Okay. Can you see what I'm referring to here?
Yes.
Okay, he says, recently referred by Dr. Manson following neuropsych testing, where anxiety was suspected to be affecting patients' cognitive functioning. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. And Mr. Sanderson reported that he was in a ski accident 1.5 years ago, where he was hit by another skier who lost control. He reportedly had 5-minute LOC and broke 4 ribs. You see that?
Yes.
And he was evaluated and told he had a concussion.
Yes.
Right, and that's actually what happened. He was evaluated and told he had a concussion, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's
by,
what we
by
discussed.
several.
Yeah.
He said that over the past year and a half, his cognition has gradually improved. Right?
Correct.
Now, people that are malingering don't go tell their doctors that they've improved, do they? Do they?
I don't know that I can make that general statement, but I think the fact that he improved, we talked about, which is a sign of.
But he has continued to have
concussion.
difficulties.
Your Honor,
With,
Bob interrupted my client.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sorry, my expert.
I'm
Can
sorry,
you
I'm
finish
sorry.
his
Would you-
answer?
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah. Did you finish your
Well, I
response?
was, I was just saying that we did talk about this earlier, that he had gotten better from the concussion.
not gotten completely better, but he improved, right?
He improved.
Says his cognition has gradually improved, but he's continued to have difficulties with motivation, energy, and anhedonia. That's a term that the jury may not understand. Loss of enjoyment of life?
Correct.
Okay. So, at least 2 of the 3 of those are things you commonly see with executive functioning problems, aren't they? Motivation, energy?
Correct.
Okay. He also described difficulties with spatial tasks such as driving, getting lost, and puzzles. Those are frequently executive functioning problems, aren't they?
Yeah, there are also major signs of dementia.
Okay. He reportedly sought out neuropsychological testing for these symptoms, but also feared that he may be experiencing early dementia symptoms. Okay?
I think it was smart for him to think that.
Smart. Mr. Sanderson noted that he felt reassured following the testing, but is still concerned regarding some of the cognitive changes he has experienced, right?
Correct.
And you understand that he was tested and told he doesn't have dementia. You understand that?
Yes.
And no diagnosis of
Correct.
dementia, ever. Right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, also, a patient, or sometimes neuropsychologists call them clients, but you call them patients, right?
Correct.
Patient or a client who has high scores in some areas is not generally a person who's trying to fake it, right?
Correct.
High scores, right?
Correct.
And in some areas, some intellectual areas, Terry Sanderson has super high scores on testing, super high. Right?
That's right.
Okay. Hold on 1 second, Your Honor. I think I'm done here. No further questions.
Mr. Owens?
No, Your Honor, no more questions, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hesh, you're excused.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Just leave it right there in front. Thanks.
Oh, you know what? I do have one more. Do you mind if I just take one more minute with him?
I think he's excused. Sorry, Mr. Sykes.
Yeah, but he's still in the courtroom.
Do you have another minute?
Very short.
All right, come on in.
Thanks.
You're still under oath?
I apologize for missing you. You talked a little bit about NPH,
Yes,
Normal pressure hydrocephaly or hydrocephalus?
that's correct.
Okay. That is a condition, is it not, that can exist for years and years and years without any symptoms.
Correct.
And the three main symptoms of NPH, if it's active, okay, are ataxia, dementia, and loss of continence.
Correct.
Okay. And
Ataxia being problems walking.
problem walking. And there's no diagnosis anywhere in those records before you that anybody ever diagnosed him with NPH.
That's right.
Okay. And a lot of good doctors looked at him, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Owens?
Entirely separate from the ski accident, do you believe Mr. Sanderson would benefit from anti-dementia medications?
Your Honor, I've checked, that's beyond the scope. I asked only about NPH.
That was Your Honor, he.
Overruled?
Go ahead.
I think it's worth a trial. Low side effects, and it could help him.
And Sam Goldstein felt the same way.
Correct.
That's all, thank you.
Mr. Sykes, anything further? Okay, thank you.
You should now run from the courtroom.
Mr. Owens, you may call your next witness.
Thank you. James has this one. I'm giving the clerk the official 114.
Your Honor, we call Dr. Angela Eastfold, a neuropsychology expert.
Thank you.
Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Good morning. Would you take a seat and then state your name and split?